Picture this. It's 1942. The Philippines are falling. America is losing. And one general stands on a beach about to flee. But he makes a promise that will echo through history. I shall return. 3 years later, he wades ashore through the surf, fulfilling that vow in one of warfare's most iconic moments. But here's what they don't tell you. Douglas MacArthur was fired by one president, nearly court-martialed by another, and his own father's shadow haunted him his entire life. He was called both a military genius and a dangerous egomaniac. He accepted Japan's surrender, then became the architect of its rebirth. He won impossible battles, lost his command in Korea, and gave a farewell speech that made grown men weep. This is the story of Douglas MacArthur, the general who wore aviator sunglasses and a corncob pipe like a crown, who quoted himself in the third person and who shaped the destiny of nations. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why he remains one of history's most controversial and fascinating military figures. Let's dive in. To understand Douglas MacArthur, you have to start with his father. Arthur MacArthur Jr. wasn't just any soldier. He was a Civil War hero who received the Medal of Honor at age 18 for leading a charge up Missionary Ridge. Young Douglas grew up listening to tales of battlefield glory, watching his father rise to the ranks, and feeling the crushing weight of expectation. Born in 1880 at an Army arsenal in Little Rock, Arkansas, Douglas never really had a childhood. He had a military preparation period. His mother, Mary Pinckney Hardy, was a Southern belle with iron determination. She pushed Douglas relentlessly, convinced he was destined for greatness. When he applied to West Point, she actually moved to a hotel near the academy to monitor his progress. Helicopter parenting before helicopters existed. At West Point, MacArthur became a legend. He graduated first in his class in 1903 with one of the highest grade point averages in the academy's history, 98.14. But here's the fascinating part. He wasn't just a book-smart cadet. He was also an athlete, a leader, and already displaying the flair for drama that would define his career. His classmates noticed something else too, an almost supernatural confidence bordering on arrogance. His early career took him to the Philippines, to Japan as an aide to his father, and to Veracruz during the Mexican Revolution. But it was World War I that transformed Captain MacArthur into a legend. Assigned to the 42nd Rainbow Division, he became known for his reckless bravery. He would walk through artillery barges without a helmet, carrying only a riding crop. When others dove for cover, MacArthur strolled through no man's land, as if taking an evening walk. Was he brave or crazy? His men couldn't decide. He earned 7 silver stars and was recommended for the Medal of Honor, though he didn't receive it. Some say due to jealousy from other officers. By war's end, he was a brigadier general at 38 and commander of the Rainbow Division. But here's where his story gets complicated. In the 1920s and 30s, MacArthur rose to become Army Chief of Staff, the highest position in the U.S. Army. Then came one of the darkest moments of his career, the Bonus Army Incident of 1932. World War I veterans marched on Washington, demanding early payment of bonuses they'd been promised. President Hoover ordered MacArthur to clear them out. MacArthur exceeded his orders, using tanks and tear gas against American veterans, burning their camps. It was brutal, excessive, and MacArthur defended every bit of it. His reputation took a serious hit. By the late 1930s, MacArthur had retired from the U.S. Army and was serving as military advisor to Philippines, helping them prepare for independence. He held the title of Field Marshal in the Philippine Army, the only American ever to hold that rank in a foreign army. He loved the pageantry, designed his own elaborate uniform, and seemed content to finish his career in Manila's tropical luxury. Then December 7th, 1941 happened. Pearl Harbor was attacked. The same day, across the international date line, Japanese forces began their assault on the Philippines. And here's where MacArthur made his first major mistake of World War II. Despite having hours of warning after Pearl Harbor, he allowed his entire air force to be destroyed on the ground. Caught completely unprepared, his B-17 bombers were sitting ducks when Japanese fighters swept in. Military historians still debate why. Was it confusion? Overconfidence? Regardless, it was a catastrophic error that left the Philippines defenseless. The Japanese invasion force landed with overwhelming superiority. MacArthur retreated to the Bataan Peninsula with his troops and Philippine President Manuel Quezon, making a last stand. The defense of Bataan and Corregidor became an epic of American military history, but not in a good way. MacArthur's forces were starving, diseased, and running out of ammunition. Roosevelt and the Joint Chiefs knew the Philippines couldn't be held. They made a controversial decision. Order MacArthur to escape to Australia to prevent Japan from capturing America's most famous general. MacArthur resisted. He wanted to stay with his men, share their fate. But orders were orders. On March 11, 1942, under cover of darkness, MacArthur, his family, and key staff officers boarded PT boats for a harrowing journey through Japanese-controlled waters. When he reached Australia, exhausted and humiliated, he made his famous declaration to press. "I came through and I shall return." Notice he said, "I not we." That was classic MacArthur. He personalized everything, making the war's narrative about his own journey. It rubbed many people the wrong way, but the American public loved it. They desperately needed a hero, and MacArthur gave them one. Meanwhile, back in the Philippines, the 76,000 American and Filipino troops he'd left behind surrendered on April 9, 1942. They endured the horrific Bataan Death March, a 65-mile forced march where thousands died of beatings, starvation, and summary execution. MacArthur would carry the guilt of that abandonment for the rest of his life, driving his obsession with liberating the Philippines. Roosevelt awarded MacArthur the Medal of Honor, partly for his defense of the Philippines, partly as propaganda to boost American morale, and partly, critics suggested, to justify the controversial decision to evacuate him. In Australia, MacArthur took command of Southwest Pacific forces and developed a strategy that would win the Pacific War: island hopping. Instead of attacking every Japanese-held island, he would bypass heavily fortified positions, cutting them off from supplies and leapfrogging toward Japan. "Hit 'em where they ain't," he called it. The brilliance of this strategy cannot be overstated. It saved hundreds of thousands of American lives. By isolating Japanese garrisons rather than attacking them head-on, MacArthur neutralized massive enemy forces without firing a shot. Those bypassed Japanese soldiers simply withered on the vine, cut off and irrelevant. His first major campaign was Papua New Guinea, a nightmare of jungle warfare, disease, and horrific conditions. But MacArthur learned fast, adapting his tactics, using air power innovatively, and coordinating amphibious operations with unprecedented skill. He captured key positions with far fewer casualties than traditional frontal assaults would have caused. But here's where MacArthur's ego became strategic. He had a parallel command in the Pacific. Admiral Chester Nimitz controlled the Central Pacific Theater, while MacArthur controlled the Southwest Pacific. They had different approaches and often competed for resources. The Joint Chiefs had to carefully balance two massive egos and strategic visions. Some historians argue this dual command structure actually worked well, creating healthy competition. Others say it was inefficient and politically motivated, keeping MacArthur away from Washington where he might challenge Roosevelt politically. There was real tension there. MacArthur was a Republican, Roosevelt a Democrat. Some in MacArthur's circle were floating his name for president. Roosevelt couldn't fire his most popular general during wartime, so he kept him as far from Washington as geographically possible. As MacArthur island hopped north through 1943 and 1944, taking New Guinea, then the Admiralty Islands, then advancing along New Guinea's coast, he created what military analysts still study today as near-perfect operational art. His casualty ratios were remarkable. He inflicted 5 to 10 Japanese casualties for every American lost, far better than the brutal ratio seen in the Central Pacific's island assaults like Tarawa or Iwo Jima. But MacArthur had one overwhelming obsession: the Philippines. The Joint Chiefs wanted to bypass them, strike directly at Formosa or even Japan itself. MacArthur argued passionately, almost desperately, that America had a moral obligation to liberate the Philippines. He'd made a promise. National honor demanded it. Behind closed doors, some suspected his motivations were more personal than strategic. In July 1944, Roosevelt made a dramatic trip to Pearl Harbor to meet with both MacArthur and Nimitz, forcing them to present their cases in person. MacArthur won. Roosevelt approved the liberation of the Philippines. October 20th, 1944. Leyte Gulf, Philippines. MacArthur waded ashore through knee-deep water, his jaw set, his famous corncob pipe clenched in his teeth, photographers capturing every moment. He strode to a microphone and declared, "People of the Philippines, I have returned. By the grace of Almighty God, our forces stand again on Philippine soil." It was pure MacArthur theater, staged, dramatic, perfect for propaganda. But don't mistake theater for lack of substance. The Battle of Leyte Gulf became the largest naval battle in history. The Japanese threw everything at the American fleet in a desperate gamble to stop the invasion. They failed catastrophically, essentially ending the Imperial Japanese Navy as an effective force. The liberation of the Philippines took months of brutal fighting. Manila was destroyed in the battle, with over 100,000 Filipino civilians killed, one of the war's greatest tragedies. MacArthur wept when he saw what the fighting had done to the city he loved, but he pushed forward relentlessly, island by island, liberating prison camps where he found emaciated American survivors of the Bataan Death March. The most emotional moment came when MacArthur returned to Corregidor, the fortress where he'd made his last stand in 1942. He raised the American flag with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face. "Hoist the colors," he ordered, "and let no enemy ever haul them down." This was an act. This was deeply personal. By war's end, MacArthur had become a 5-star general of the Army, one of only 5 men to hold that rank. On September 2nd, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, he presided over Japan's surrender. It was perhaps the most important ceremony of the 20th century, and MacArthur orchestrated it with his characteristic sense of drama. He invited representatives from all Allied nations. He positioned the signing table so photographers could capture the moment perfectly. And when he spoke, his words resonated with both authority and unexpected mercy. "It is my earnest hope, and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion a better world shall emerge, a world dedicated to the dignity of man." Here's where MacArthur's story becomes truly extraordinary. He became supreme commander for the Allied powers in Japan, essentially a de facto American emperor ruling over defeated Japan. The scope of his power was unprecedented. He could reshape an entire nation, and that's exactly what he did. Most of the world expected harsh retribution. The Soviet representatives certainly did. But MacArthur took a different approach, one that might be his greatest legacy. He understood that crushing Japan would create another Germany after World War I, resentful, impoverished, ripe for extremism. Instead, he decided to transform it. First, he made a brilliant political move. The question of Emperor Hirohito dominated early occupation planning. Many wanted him tried as a war criminal and executed. MacArthur met privately with Hirohito, the first time a commoner had ever met the emperor as an equal, and recognized that the emperor was crucial to stabilizing Japan. He protected Hirohito from war crimes trials, using him instead as a symbol of continuity while stripping him of actual political power. Then MacArthur launched revolutionary reforms. He gave women the right to vote, instantly enfranchising half the population. He broke up the zaibatsu, giant industrial monopolies. He implemented land reform, distributing farmland to tenant farmers. He encouraged labor unions. He oversaw the writing of a new constitution that included the famous Article 9, renouncing war forever. He purged militarists from government and education. He reformed the education system itself, democratizing it. This wasn't just occupation. This was social engineering on a scale rarely attempted. And here's the remarkable thing. It worked. MacArthur became genuinely beloved by the Japanese people. They called him Gaijin Shogun, the foreign generalissimo. When he drove through Tokyo, crowds gathered to see him. He lived in the American embassy like a proconsul, holding court, making decisions that affected 70 million people. Critics pointed out he ruled like a benevolent dictator, brooking no opposition from his own staff, and certainly not from the Japanese. He censored the press, suppressed information about radiation effects at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and pursued policies that sometimes reflected his personal conservative values rather than pure democracy. But the overall transformation he supervised was staggering. turning a militaristic empire into a pacifist democracy in just a few years. Historians still debate MacArthur's occupation. Was he a far-sighted statesman who created the modern Japanese miracle, or an autocrat who happened to implement mostly good policies? Probably both. Then came Korea and MacArthur's tragedy. When North Korea invaded South Korea on June 25, 1950, the 70-year-old general was still supreme commander in Japan. President Truman appointed him commander of UN forces rushing to Korea's defense. Initially, it was a disaster. North Korean forces nearly pushed UN troops into the sea at the Pusan perimeter. MacArthur's response was his last moment of strategic genius, the Incheon landing. Every military advisor told him it was impossible. The tides at Incheon were extreme. The invasion window was tiny. The harbor approaches were narrow and easily defended. It was madness. MacArthur did it anyway. On September 15, 1950, 75,000 troops landed at Incheon in one of history's great amphibious assaults. It was MacArthur's D-Day, his masterpiece. The landing cut North Korean supply lines instantly. Within weeks, UN forces had recaptured Seoul and were driving north. North Korea was collapsing. And here's where MacArthur's judgment failed catastrophically. Despite clear warnings from China that they would intervene if UN forces approached their border, MacArthur pushed north. He dismissed intelligence reports of massive Chinese troop buildups. He assured Truman the war would be over by Christmas. He was wrong. In November 1950, 300,000 Chinese troops smashed into MacArthur's divided forces. It was one of the worst defeats in American military history. UN forces retreated in chaos. The war, MacArthur said, was won became a bloody stalemate. MacArthur's response revealed how far his ego had grown. He demanded permission to bomb Chinese bases in Manchuria, to use nationalist Chinese troops from Taiwan, even to employ nuclear weapons against China. When Truman and the Joint Chiefs refused, MacArthur began publicly criticizing their strategy, essentially accusing the president of cowardice. This was insubordination, clear and simple. MacArthur was challenging civilian control of the military, one of American democracy's most sacred principles. He issued unauthorized statements, corresponded with Republican congressmen, and essentially conducted his own foreign policy. On April 11, 1951, President Truman fired him. "I could do nothing else and still be president of the United States," Truman later wrote. The public reaction was explosive. MacArthur was beloved. Truman's approval ratings were terrible. Truman received death threats, but he stood firm on principle. MacArthur returned to America for the first time in 14 years to a hero's welcome. 7.5 million people lined the streets of New York for his ticker tape parade, the largest crowd in the city's history. He was invited to address a joint session of Congress, a rare honor. His speech on April 19, 1951, became legendary. Speaking without notes, his voice strong despite his 71 years, MacArthur defended his conduct, warned against appeasement of communism, and closed with words that entered American memory. Old soldiers never die. They just fade away. And like the old soldier of that ballad, I now close my military career and just fade away, an old soldier who tried to do his duty as God gave him the light to see that duty. Goodbye. There wasn't a dry eye in the chamber. Congressmen wept openly. It was a masterful performance. Vintage MacArthur, turning his firing into a triumph, positioning himself as a martyr for principle. Public opinion swung in his favor temporarily, but history ultimately vindicated Truman's decision. Senate hearings examined MacArthur's conduct and strategy. Joint Chiefs testified that MacArthur proposed expansion of the war risked World War III with China and possibly the Soviet Union. The public gradually understood that Truman had been right to maintain civilian control, even at enormous political cost. MacArthur faded from public life, though not quietly. He became chairman of Remington Rand, gave speeches, wrote his memoirs, and watched as his reputation became increasingly controversial. In 1962, he returned to West Point for his final speech, another memorable address where he spoke of duty, honor, country, with such passion that cadets who heard it remember it still. He died on April 5, 1964, at 84, still controversial, still fascinating. President Johnson declared a day of national mourning. MacArthur lay in state at the Capitol Rotunda, but the debates about his legacy were just beginning. So, who was Douglas MacArthur? A brilliant strategist who saved countless lives with innovative tactics, or a glory-seeking egomaniac who risked World War III? A visionary who rebuilt Japan into a democracy, or an autocrat who ruled by fiat? A hero who kept his promise to return, or a general who exceeded his authority and challenged civilian control? The answer is all of these. MacArthur was a man of staggering contradictions, capable of genuine greatness and spectacular misjudgment, sometimes simultaneously. He was undoubtedly one of history's great military minds. His campaigns in the Pacific were masterpieces of operational art. His occupation of Japan was statesmanship at its finest. But his inability to accept limits on his authority, his towering ego, and his belief in his own infallibility ultimately destroyed him. Perhaps the most telling assessment came from President Truman, who said, "I fired him because he wouldn't respect the authority of the president. I didn't fire him because he was a dumb son of a bitch, although he was. But that's not against the law for generals. If it was, half to three-quarters of them would be in jail." MacArthur spent his entire life chasing his father's legacy and surpassed it, becoming more famous, more decorated, more powerful than Arthur MacArthur ever was. But in the end, he couldn't escape the fundamental tension between military genius and democratic governance. MacArthur's story raises questions still relevant today. How much authority should military commanders have? When does confidence become arrogance? Can a great military mind understand political limitations? Where's the line between genius and hubris? Here's a question for you. If you had been Truman, would you have fired MacArthur, or would you have let him pursue his strategy in Korea, risking a wider war? It's not an easy question, and there's no clearly right answer, which is exactly why MacArthur's story remains endlessly fascinating. If you found this deep dive into MacArthur's extraordinary life compelling, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We explore the complex lives of history's most controversial figures, the heroes, the villains, and those who were somehow both. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. Until next time, remember, history is never as simple as the legend suggests, and the most fascinating people are always